Hello guys, today I'd like to explain how to see and draw light and shadows, and in my next video I'm going to explain how to paint light and shadows. So let's begin. It's difficult for students to see the basic shapes in the complex objects, and that's why it's fascinating to see artists draw and paint beautiful pictures, and it's difficult for the beginners to understand how to break down the complex forms into simple forms and how to see light and shadow. The basic formula is very simple. I bet you've seen this before. It's listed in every blog and art magazine. But what's crucial to understand is how to apply this formula to every object that you see. First of all, you must learn to analyze the light and how it turns the form. You must see the light direction and how it's turning the form. For instance, over here the light comes from the left and we see the brightest area, which is called the highlight. We see the form shadow, which is the darkest area on the object. We see the cast shadow, which is the shadow cast from the object. We see the reflected light, which is very dark but still lighter than the form shadow. And we see a range of middle tones. So how do we apply this formula to everyday objects and even, to drawing people? Whenever we look at solid objects, the formula is exactly the same. Can you see the form shadow on every object drawn here? Let's look at this basic example. I've made this many years ago when I taught art in schools. I want to show you how you need to look at objects, how you can see the lights and the shadows, and ultimately make any kind of object look realistic. Any solid object follows the same rules, depicting it three-dimensionally. Glass and some metals and other surfaces have a different formula, but when you look at solid objects, it's always the same idea of basically finding the form shadow. And the form shadow usually sits closer to the edge, but not on the edge of the object. Here, because of the light, it moved up quite a bit. But you need to look for this form shadow in any solid object to depict it realistically. It's the darkest area on the object. Okay, then we have a reflected light over here. It's always below the form shadow, and reflected light is the light that gets reflected from the surfaces around the object. Then we have the middle tone, and usually it consists of a progression of tones from darks to lights. And we have the highlight over here, and actually here and here as well. Usually we see one highlight, but it depends on the lighting conditions. Sometimes you can see more. And also we have the cast shadow. The cast shadow is the shadow that you see every day by placing your phone or pencils or books on your table, for instance, and you see a shadow under the object. It always connects to the object, and it's important to catch it as well because it gives physical presence to your object when you start drawing or painting it. So let's recap. What you must find in every object is the form shadow. Then you must get the cast shadow, the reflected light, middle tone, and the highlights. And this is how you're going to make it look three-dimensional when you start shading it. Before you start shading it, you have to sketch out the outline of the apple. Instead of focusing on the outline of the apple itself, first thing you need to figure out is the direction. This is super important. That's how you place your object rotating in space. You look at the center line here. It's in the middle over here. Okay, and I usually sketch it out very lightly. I made this dotted line so it's easy to explain. But basically I make a very light line determining the direction of the object, and then I look at this and think what basic shape it has. It's obviously it's a circle, so I make a circle first. Okay, and then I look at the direction over here, right? It doesn't go that way, this way, it goes this way. And it's important to catch that, to place the exact direction. Also, when I make a circle, I mark the top and bottom of the apple, and then I focus on the object in between those two marks. It's important because you determine the scale and the size of the object this way. And only after that I mark my line for the cast shadow. So this would be a very rough sketch done in 2B pencil. The value scale is basically shading from the purest white to the darkest dark. It's easy to understand, but it's difficult to apply in your drawing. I recommend start practicing shading by making these squares and using your hard and soft pencils, shading in different direction or cross hatching, and trying to get this range of tones. Because then you will be applying this range of tones, shading any other kind of object you see. Any drawing must have at least 5 values. If you have more, then it's going to look even more realistic. This is basic value scale done in a couple of colors, and I teach values and color in my colored pencil book that you can buy on Amazon. And the most common question is, where do I begin sketching? You always begin sketching from your darkest areas or your shadows. In this case, I always start shading my form shadow first, because it's the darkest area on my object. And I also mark my cast shadow. The pencil strokes would have a different direction. Don't forget about that, because the apple is round, and when you shade it following the form or going against it, you create the roundness of the shape, besides the fact that you make it with the different tones, you also make it with the strokes. Anyways, you always start shading from your darkest areas first, okay? And it doesn't have to be very dark at first, because you can layer it and make it darker afterwards. And this is what happens. In reality, it seems to be very dark at first, but then when you keep shading the rest of it, you realize that this is not dark enough. All right, and here you see the progression of tones, going from this form shadow to the reflected light, and catching the middle tones going into the lights themselves. This drawing was made on light gray paper, and actually it's missing out on, brighter highlights that I could make with white colored pencil, because I draw on colored paper. In this case, I just left the highlights uncolored. And only then, like when you're done with placing the shadows, the transitions between the tones, then you can do the texture of the apple that's unique, to every apple. Here you can see that I've done a few random dots. And again, when you do it, think of the curvature of the apple to make it look three-dimensional. And to shade this well, I always think of my values. This is the value scale going from purest black to purest white. You must have at least 5 values in your drawings to make it look round. And this is a similar drawing, a sketch that I've done a while ago, showing you the same steps. Do you see the highlight, the reflected light, the form shadow, and the cast shadow? All of that needs to be in your drawing when you shade solid objects. Drawing in color follows the same formula. The difference is that the artist learns to translate those colors into values, and once again practice your value scale shading in different tones. When you become quite good at shading in pencil or charcoal, basically shading in one color, and you want to explore the possibilities drawing in colored pencil, that would be the next step. And I offer 2 video courses focusing on shading and colored pencil techniques using colored pencils on various papers. I hope this lesson was helpful. If you like this video, feel free to share, like, and ask me questions in the comments below. And I'm going to do a video showing how to paint light and shadows using oil paint. Again, thanks for watching. Bye bye.